Right. Good afternoon. We started out as a panel of four, and thankfully I've managed to ask one of my American colleagues, Mr. Sean DeMol down the end, who has an important role at ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors and Publishers, which is the equivalent of APRA. His expertise is in film and television, and you'll see why that's particularly relevant to this discussion as we proceed. But just to roll down the line, if you could quickly introduce yourselves. Sarah, please.
Definitely. Hello, everyone. My name's Sarah Hamilton, and I run Ditto Music's Australian office. We're a digital aggregator, and we work with about 100,000 bands across the world. And we have offices in the UK and the US. We've just been here in Australia for 2 years, so if you haven't heard of us, I forgive you, that's okay. But I'm here to discuss independent artists and streaming revenues that they see and anything that you guys would like to know about that.
I'm Dan Nevin, I'm CEO of AIR. So AIR is the Australian Independent Record Labels Association. And we work on behalf of the independent music sector, so primarily labels, but artists as well, talking with government, industry, and helping where we can.
Harvey Saywood, Managing Director and co-owner of Remote Control Records, Melbourne-based. We look after the Beggars group of labels in Australia, plus a lot of our local artists and small labels as well. Grew up in rural Tasmania, so have slowly adapted to life in the big city over the last 30 years.
Andrew Harris from APRA-AMCOS. We represent songwriters and publishers throughout Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific. My role is as the principal analyst in the policy department, which means that I do a lot of the research work, and we also do all of the licensing of the streaming services, so we get insight into all of the data coming in from those and understanding what's happening in that world in Australia, New Zealand and Asia.
Sean Lamone from ASCAP, as Ian has introduced me. I'm really happy to be out here with all of you. I was at the APRA Awards on Thursday night. It was fantastic. And I'm in LA. I work at ASCAP, which Ian explained is the APRA of the states, and I specialize in anything that involves AV. So I'm going to be up here talking about Netflix and Hulu and all those exciting new things. It's definitely an expanding source of income for ASCAP, and we're excited about it. Thank you.
My day job is Managing Director of Mushroom Music Publishing, which I've done for 30 years. I've worked for Michael Gudinski for 30 years. There are some people who've actually worked longer, which is a miracle. Of particular relevance to this panel is the fact that I'm the chair of AMCOS and the deputy chair of APRA, and those two rights societies are smack in the middle of this debate. So to set the scene, I'm going to ask both Andrew and Dan to just, I guess, lay out the foundations of where streaming is at the moment. Maybe Dan, from the independent record labels point of view, could you describe the landscape that we're currently in? And we'll get to the future a little later. Let's just talk about the present.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, whilst there are a lot of players in the Australian market, so there are a lot of streaming services, as I'm sure everyone's aware. The streaming, I guess the growth of streaming hasn't quite taken off like it has in other parts of the world, but I think that's just to do with the amount of time that we've had streaming over here. But obviously got the big players, your Spotify, your Apple Music, Google Play, your Audios. They're the main players. I guess we could speculate as to how things are going to pan out over the next few years. A lot of people are thinking that there's going to be the main three, but I guess we can talk about that during the conversation. Andrew, have you got any?
Yeah, look, I think the sort of the stage for this stuff at the moment is, streaming. Everyone sees streaming as the future, and they're probably right. But the issue is that it's not actually at the moment delivering the money required to make up for the loss from other sources. And I know Dan can have a different view on that in terms of his membership group, where they're seeing a positive story coming out. But when you look at it overall, the declines outside of streaming in the amount of money people are making is not being made up for by streaming. So we're kind of at the position in the market at the moment where for this thing to actually work, something has to happen. And we've seen it ticking along for probably about 3 years now in Australia, and we just haven't got there yet. So the big question is what is going to make it get there? And there's a lot of signs of things happening in other parts of the world, and we look into China, for example, and there's 300 million users of a music service there, but that no one really knows of outside of Australia. And it's more based on messaging apps and other things that we don't even consider as being really music streaming. But there's so much out there. It's just a matter of how do we make it go mainstream. So that's the big question, because we really need the number of subscribers in Australia to grow by 4 times to get to the point where we're back to where we were.
What's the proportion on the revenue at the moment with streaming of FTMAUS' revenue? Not the total revenue, but the digital revenue.
Yeah, I'll talk about the market as a whole, not necessarily FTMAUS, because then we kind of get stuck in the rights flow. But overall, it's probably going to be lucky to get to about 1/3 of the market this year. And I think last year it was about 8 to 10%. So there's a lot of talk about streaming, but there's not as much money coming in. And one of the big factors in this is the fact that you can get music for free on a service that has half of the on-demand music streams in the US at the moment that everybody just uses for free. Any guesses for what that is? It's the service that just on Thursday this week in the UK at a conference, the head of the BPI, which is the equivalent of ARIA in the UK, said that the labels in the UK were getting more revenue from vinyl sales than they were from this audio-visual service. Anybody want to guess what it is?
YouTube, maybe?
Yeah. So.
YouTube.
Let's talk about the Asian licensing as well while we're setting the landscape, the new Pan-Asian licensing schemes.
Yeah, sure. So for the last 2 years, APRA has been licensing on behalf of a major publisher, Universal Music Publishing, and some other smaller publishers as well. And basically no money has been coming out of Asia at all, so no rights holders have been getting paid. But we've been licensing a lot of the big services in there now, and it's incredible. The types of services we're seeing are ones that we've never come across in Australia before. And it's just a completely different world. So money coming out of things like incidental music in the back of a Korean celebrity's live video stream. So there's all this money that's never been received by anybody because no one's been licensing it or trying to, but it's been very difficult to get the money out. So it's kind of really positive looking at that stuff and thinking it's not just about Spotify. It's not just about streaming and getting bundling like Telstra have with streaming right. It's about all the other things that are happening and making sure that the value of music can be captured in it and not just let the tech companies run away with the money, but somehow get that money. And the foray into Asia so far has been just really eye-opening, the kind of things that are happening. There's a service launching next week in Malaysia that has a tie-up with a major brand there, and it's going to be a part of everybody's package, and it just happens. And this money starts flowing because it's there, but we haven't been getting it. And one of my anecdotes is that when we were recording our first record, if we would have taken the money and invested it in Apple Computer, that was like 20 grand, we'd be millionaires now. So there's been massive transfer of value. So you say, I put my $20,000 into Apple back in, say, 2003. I'd be a millionaire now. And that was before iTunes and all that sort of stuff took off. So there's value, but it's being transferred, so we've got to get it back.
Dan, the role of Merlin is also an international role. Do you want to just talk that through?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to Andrew's point, absolutely. There's your YouTubes and stuff that's happening in Asia where the artists and the labels probably aren't seeing as much money as they should. But on a global scale, I don't know if many of you know about organisation Merlin. So they're the digital rights organisation, and they have over 650 independent label members from all over the world. And essentially they go out and they will negotiate with most of the big services. There's a couple they haven't done deals with yet, like Apple, but Spotify. They basically do a deal for the independent labels, and the independent labels have to make sure that they're delivering to these services. So interestingly enough, they did a survey middle of this year. As I said, of their 650 plus members. It was a pretty good story, actually. A lot of the labels, I think it was 55, what was it that I had here? 55% of those labels had seen an increase in revenue for the year from digital So that's a good story. I think Merlin themselves saw a 43% increase in their revenue year on year, so they obviously passed that onto the label. So I guess in summary, the independent labels are seeing quite a bit of growth on a global level, maybe not so much here yet. And another interesting thing to note too is you've got your premium and your freemium on your streaming service as well, and the statistics that came out of the survey showed that independent content fared 35% better on the premium services than it did the freemium. So I guess, you know, it's pretty easy to make the connection that people that are paying, you could draw the long bow of saying that they're bigger music fans and they're consuming more deeper content. So for the independents, the more people we start getting onto the premium services and they're exploring that back catalogue and content, then it's going to be an even better story for us.
Andrew, your job as an analyst is to keep your eye on lots of moving parts in our musical economy in Australia. I guess the landscape here is that Apple is what, 3 months in? How far in are we?
Yep, we just got the first reports from Apple Music last week.
Right, and how long for Spotify?
A long time.
What, 3 years?
No, look, without saying too much, Apple Music so far has been a little bit tepid. It hasn't been what we would have expected. We were hoping for a lot more. Now, a lot of that comes down to the bundling with Telstra, which, you know, Telstra, I hope there's no one from Telstra in the room, but, you know, Telstra had the best tie-up for a music service. They had all conditions in place to make it go mainstream with MOG, but they didn't touch it. They did nothing with it, and they even had it unmetered. Now, the new Telstra bundle with Apple, it sort of feels like it's going down the same path at the moment. It's not actually delivering the way everybody would hope it would deliver. But having said that, as a new service, it's going great in terms of the number of subscribers, but it's no Spotify, put it that way.
But from your point of view, how long before the data starts to become meaningful?
Sorry, Ian,
12 months or 18 months?
Look, no, yeah, that's right, Ian. I mean, Apple are interesting in the way that they're reporting, and their 3-month trial period was also quite interesting because that was not standard for a streaming service. So the first reports we've got in are all trial users, so we have no idea how many people have actually started paying for the service. And then by the time we can see that kind of initial trial period run through, it could be about 12 months before we actually get anything meaningful out of it. And you can't split it apart to know what the trends are month on month because they're reporting in a bigger clump. So there's a lot of guesswork in it. So it's probably going to be about a year, I think, before we can really make a good judgment on Apple Music.
Could I say a positive thing from the Apple perspective is that I think we all saw a rapid decline, a likely rapid decline in actual digital sales, and that hasn't really occurred yet.
Yeah, that's right.
From a label's perspective, you know, we thought it would smash it to bits, but digital has stayed pretty steady, to be honest.
Yeah, look, I was looking at that the other day, and over the last 9 months or so, downloads haven't really gone that badly. You know, everyone expects them to be declining all the time, but it's still a really big revenue source, and it wasn't the cannibalisation that everybody was expecting. Yeah. So I think downloads have got a bit of a life left in them yet.
So Harvey, from your point of view, you're in the driving seat of a label which obviously has got a fairly impressive catalogue. Have you got an approach or a tactic to deal with this digital world, or are you, given that your artists are doing pretty well, you roll with it and count the cash? I mean, what's the plan, man?
Not sure about count the cash, but I think from our perspective, we've tried to continue to do what we've always done best, which is the promotion and marketing of the music itself, and just hope that the revenues are there still there from the traditional means and from new services as well. And to be honest, last year was probably the toughest year we've had in a long while, in that it really was a transitional year. CDs seemed to hit a little bit of a wall, and we got a lot back from JB, Sanity, the big players, all in one hit. Digital had a quiet year, and you know, streaming just hadn't really started to take over. But at the same time, we probably just didn't have the release schedule, and for us, it's sort of all really based around that. We've been lucky in that pretty much most years we've had, you know, a gold selling act, something that's done 35,000 plus, whereas last year I think our best selling Our new release was around the 10,000 mark, which is a pretty big step down for us. But then, it all seems to come back around in, what are we, 2015 is looking way better.
Well, let's use the words promotion and marketing. As I understand it, some of these sites have local representation, whereas others have offshore masters, shall we say, and they're a little less flexible. Is there any, I mean, obviously the landscape that we're all used to is particularly based around radio. Are there people you can go to? Are there contacts that you can feel comfortable with?
Yeah, I think definitely with Spotify and Apple, we're in pretty regular contact, pretty much daily contact with those, in the same way as we might have been with a physical retailer in the past, and still are with a physical retailer as well. Probably the hard thing for us to balance is, that there's 3 different parts of the market now, and we've sort of got to service all of them, and that takes a lot more resources than, when I started out, it was just promoting to radio, selling to retail, working the media and working the retail side, and there's sort of two aspects to it. But now there's several levels, and that's become the complexity that we've had to sort of deal with over the last few years.
And prioritise, obviously, yeah.
And prioritise, very much so. And I think where it's become really tough for us is on the sort of new developmental releases, because you no longer can just sort of put CDs in the market and hope for the best, perhaps like you might have been able to before. We actually have to sort of sit back now and try and get something working on an act before we get to that point where we really try and sell it into traditional retail, and even get a lot of iTunes support can take quite a bit of time. So that's where I guess streaming has been a real positive for us, in that they often seem to be early adopters, and I guess the early adopter consumer has perhaps moved across to streaming to some extent. Sarah,
First off, your business is a little different because it's nothing to do with owning a company like Spotify. So perhaps we could start with just the essence of what Ditto does.
Yep.
And then I know you had a comment there, so whichever order you want to do it in, where you go.
Yeah, sure. So at Ditto, artists will upload their music to our website. We distribute out to Spotify, iTunes, Audio, Shazam, all of the different stores and streaming sites, and then we get the royalties sent back to us and then back to the artists. So if using a company like Ditto or TuneCore, artists receive 100% of the money back from the stores. On the comment of promotion and marketing, I just wanted to mention, I know there's probably a lot of independent artists out there, and you might think that some of the promotion on Spotify and iTunes isn't accessible to you. That's not right. One of the things that I do at Ditto, and part of the reason I thought it was important to have an Australian office for a digital aggregator, is that we pitch to Spotify and iTunes for playlisting, Audio, all of the different stores. So a lot of artists might not be aware that you can actually, do some research, find out what playlists would suit your music, contact your aggregator, and you can pitch and get added to playlists. And it's pretty remarkable how quickly plays can go up on Spotify, and how different things can happen if you get added to one particular playlist. There's a lot of tastemakers out there all over the world that could be following that playlist. They start a new one. You as an artist can create your own playlist. It's another thing to add to the millions of things that you have to do already, but it's definitely a really good tool, and something that we're seeing just really ups the plays and the profile of our bands.
Well, this is one thing that Dan Rosen mentioned yesterday, is that at the moment a lot of these playlists are actually being formulated in America or in the UK, and Australian acts to some extent are disadvantaged by that, and I'm quite interested, obviously from our label's point of view, in how we push through that. So got any advice for Mushroom on how we go about doing this sort of stuff? Because we're going to have to get right across this. We're all going to have to get right across this, of course.
Yeah. Sure. There are a lot of Australian playlists definitely being collated that are Australian. I think a lot of them are Australian, New Zealand, but they're really trying to get into the local music and support local artists as well. So there's a lot of playlists that you can submit to, and they are Australian based. Yep.
Now, the essence of Ditto is something that you also need to take on board. If you think that your artist is going to register directly with say Apple in America, and they're going to pay you royalties, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that this level of what we might call aggregation is probably the only way that acts either not signed to labels that have existing arrangements or are below a certain level of recognition or revenue to actually access the royalties anywhere, really. Is that where it's at?
That's exactly right. And there's a bunch of different companies out there also, but basically we work in a similar way in that we get your music, convert it to all the different files that the stores need, and then get the money back to you. So unfortunately, you can't go directly to these stores for a multitude of reasons, but also because, we'll get a million questions a day from our artists that we then need to find the answers to from iTunes. Rather than you contacting them directly, you come through someone like us and we can get the information for you. Also just for accounting purposes, so we can get the reports and get everything back to you.
Now, Sean's here for a reason. It's because when I bumped into him at the APRA Awards, I realised that there was a very important part of this panel that wasn't being represented, and that is that streaming is not just limited to music, but almost all film and television contains music. So it's very relevant how much the success of the audio-visual streaming services are having. Number one, APRA AMCOS has agreements in place with Netflix and its competitors. And I think Andrew will probably be able to give us some numbers, but I'm going to start with Sean. To me, it's almost the best free kick we've got out of this, because when Netflix started up, within a very short period of time, I believe that their subscriber base was about the same as Foxtel's. Andrew, would that be a fair statement?
I can't disclose. It's not the same as Foxtel's.
I reckon it was about the same as Foxtel's.
No. Let's just say that audiovisual streaming services have probably got a similar number, or maybe a little more than music services in Australia, and they've been here for a few months compared to a few years.
I'm not talking music streaming, I'm talking Foxtel.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about Foxtel.
Andrew's not going to talk about Foxtel. Sean's not. Yeah. Sean, okay, let's take some broad strokes on this. Okay. In America, this is probably a big free kick for the film and television industry. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. It's the number one expanding area as far as ASCAP's income. If you look at international and cable and network and local, the new streaming, the licenses that we have from that is still smaller. But Netflix especially is expanding in leaps and bounds as the subscription rate has really gotten high. They now are paying us about as much as a larger cable operator, which is kind of astounding because they're new. And I know I've heard that they're also new here in Australia, but their subscriber uptick has been extremely fast, which I would expect because they already have a very strong established brand in the States, and they've got content that's only available on Netflix, and I think that gives them a real advantage over others. Amazon is also doing well. It's newer, and so the license fees that we're seeing from Amazon right now are not as much, but I expect that's going to also increase. And then there's Hulu that's been around for a while. They don't have the same level of uptick with subscribers, but all of those are sort of one type of application. The other one is the open-ended one, YouTube being the big beast out there. And they have, a lot of things that are being made by people that just go and upload things onto the site, which makes a real hassle for us to identify and pay on all of the things that are up there. And a lot of it is music, a lot of it is video, extracts from games. It runs the width of everything that ASCAP has. They do a pretty good job in reporting songs because they have a content ID application that can fingerprint and ID all the songs that they can find on there. But most of the data that we get from them are popular songs that are registered with us from all the majors and some of the larger independents. What we really have a hard time with them, and we know that it's out there, is videos of films and series and games, and right now there's no mechanism to really find all of that stuff and ID and pay on it. That's not a problem when you have a closed system like Netflix, where basically they know exactly what's being streamed. The license that we have with them, we just did a new one that was last month, and the rates increased, or not necessarily the rates.
What was the rate?
I'm not going to, I extract the word rate. The rate did not increase. The license fee increased substantially because they're doing really, really well. So we're excited about that. The royalty rate that ASCAP will pay is going to be a lot higher than it has historically. I know a lot of people have been disappointed when they have a show that's on Netflix because they expect the rates to be a lot higher than they have been, but now they are going to be. The difference is in how we're paying on streaming as how we paid on broadcast is historically you've been able to call ASCAP and say, I've got a show on ABC, I've got a half an hour, each episode, how much should I expect to get paid? And I could give you, well, the rate on ABC is this. So $180 like a minute times that. And then you can do the math and extrapolate out how much you should expect to get paid for your show. Netflix, I don't have a number because it depends on how many people are going to watch your show. Because the metrics that we get in from them shows the different titles of all the films and episodes, and then how many times each one of those was watched within that spectrum of time. So we base the weight that you get paid on it based upon audience size, and that's the way that everything is going to be paid going forward. As I see the world is like eventually going to be almost entirely a streaming-like environment. 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, but that's the way that the world is going. The good news is that on systems like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon that are contained, we have a very good mechanism to identify and pay on all the music that's on there. YouTube, we still have a lot of work that has to be done.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that. I mean, there's obviously a spectrum, and Netflix is at one end, and it's very contained in terms of its music use, so it's very easy to get the reporting in and then pay out. And this goes into the idea that people aren't happy with the amount of money they're getting back from streaming services, whether it's music or video, and a lot of that comes back to reporting and knowing what was played. Now, YouTube's the next level, where there's just so much out there that it's really hard to track it all, and to go through and identify every video it's actually a human thing that you have to do. You can run all these algorithms and you can run all these software programs that do fuzzy lookups and all that kind of thing, but in the end, you're not going to pick everything up. Now, but if we can make a way of getting that to work, there's a lot of money out there because these things do generate value. And the next level down is that we're talking to certain video services, and the second largest video service in the world is Dailymotion, which is a French company. I don't know if you've used it, but whenever anything gets blocked on YouTube, Dailymotion can still keep it. So it's kind of the second go-to port for a YouTube. And they've traditionally not been licensed for music use, and companies like that don't really track it in the way that YouTube do. So then the problem is to understand what's being used once they do get licensed, which means that they will be paying money for their music use. So we're out there at the moment trying to work out deals like this throughout Asia, and Dailymotion is the largest video site in many countries in Asia because YouTube's banned. So in Pakistan, you can't watch YouTube videos, so Dailymotion is huge. But the problem here is that you've got Netflix, which is great because it's just like cue sheets from the old days from TV, and you can pay out on it. So if your music was on Netflix, you'll know exactly how much you're getting paid. But then by the time you filter through to sort of these rogue video sites, there's lots of them, and they should be paying fees for using music. But then once you get the fees in, it's a question of having to use a lot of manpower and a lot of systems to get it out there. So that's one of the other big problems of audiovisual, is that it's identifying the music. So, a show like Peppa Pig might have a writer who basically needs to get paid for his Peppa Pig theme song, but it's not classified as music, so YouTube isn't reporting it as music.
No.
And it's all driven by the labels. So once they identify a song, it goes into the database for YouTube to pick it up. So there's all this stuff out there that hopefully we can get somehow, and that will hopefully increase the amount of money coming back from streaming services, particularly video.
Just to finish this thought, just so you understand that the film and television writers at APRA are the most substantial earners, apart from some Sears and AC/DCs.
Oh, yeah.
And a similar situation I would expect, Sean, would apply to the US, although your songwriters, some of your obviously classic songwriters,
Sure.
make a decent money. There's a landscape here where you've had a traditional earning source, particularly from commercial television and to a lesser extent cable. Do you see that being cannibalised, or is there a possibility that we can actually end up with a bigger pool here if this all, given that those traditional sources aren't going to go away in the medium term, I'd say, there might be an upside to this where you get, two sandwiches rather than one.
Well, let me just explain what's happening now. The audiences are getting a lot smaller on network and local stations, so they're struggling to maintain the same kind of advertising that they've had historically. So we're looking at license fees on our network and local stations that most likely are going to be going down. So that's definitely going to have a big impact on American, on Australian writers as well, whose music is being used in the States. So that's the downside of this. That's the sad part of the story, is that as the audiences shrink on broadcast and cable's been doing well historically up until this past year. What's happening in America, I'm not sure if it's happening here in Australia, that a lot of younger folks are starting to cut their bills off and say, I don't want to pay for this anymore. So there's this big move in America where people are trying to just get off of paying the big huge bills to AT&T and Comcast and everyone else, and just go on the internet and stream all the AV that they want. And it's a big source of anxiety for cable in the States, because they're starting to see their subscriber rates actually shrink, which has never happened before. So looking at that happening now and being able to respond, what you're asking is, do I think it's going to be a bigger pie in the future? As I explained, the revenue on Netflix that ASCAP is receiving is growing substantially because their subscribers have also increased. Do I think that in 10 years that the license fees that we're getting from streaming AV sites will offset the inevitable fall of the license fees from broadcast and cable? You can't know. But that's why it's so important that ASCAP and APRA fight the fight to make sure that the relative rates that are being paid for the new services equal, the same rates that the old ones had to pay. And so as that audience shifts from traditional to new media, that we can still afford to pay all of you guys the same amount of royalties that we've paid you in the past. I will say that every year ASCAP's overall revenue has gone up and up. 2014 was our first year that we hit the big B. I can't even say it, $1 billion, which was a big thing for us, $1 billion. And 2015 looks to be $1 billion and maybe a little bit more. And so 2016, we don't know, because we are starting to see a reduction in radio license fees. People aren't listening to radio in their car as much. They're going on their iPhone, they're going on to streaming, they're going on to satellite radio, which is not a part of this conversation, but it is important to throw out there that it's doing extremely well in the States. And that's actually a source of increased income for us. But on the AV side, there's concern that over the next couple of years that the networks could reach a critical loss of audience, where the peak, because right now, even though their audiences have gotten smaller on ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, they've been able to make the argument to advertisers, it's like, well, we're still the #1 place to get a big audience. There isn't any other place out there where you can get an audience as big as ours. So even though our audience is still smaller, you should still pay the same in advertising, because we're still the only place that can offer that. Now, once that audience reaches a certain point, there's this prevailing theory that the advertisers are going to say, you know what, I don't need you anymore, at least not at that rate. And so then you could see a real flood of live revenue from the major networks in the States, which would definitely have a huge impact on our license fees. So we really need to stay on YouTube and Netflix and Amazon and Apple and all of these new areas to make sure that we can enjoy the kind of success that we've had in the past.
Okay, let's move on from statistics. A couple of questions to Harvey and to Dan. It occurred to me that music television had its heyday quite some time ago. MTV is no longer a music station. Do you think that this could, in fact, revitalise the idea of music television and make videos relevant again? That's number one. And number two, that the nature of those videos appears to be changing from the traditional 3-minute short film to more organic type video, type audio visual things. I know Mushroom's got a cameraman who basically follows our acts around and films them. So do you see an upside there, Harvey, in terms of getting music back onto the screen? Perhaps not the television screen, but somebody's screen?
Certainly not back onto the television screen, but back onto the small screen, the computer screen. And I think that's become a real important driver for us. Having videos and curating footage that can be used to keep the story going on an act. We've even taken to filming our local bands with both Sasquatch, Methyl Ethyl, Dorsal Fins. We did a session in Newmarket Studios where we filmed the band doing the launch of their album, so pretty much playing through their albums. And then we slowly sort of used that footage to float around on the internet, basically, but we don't present that footage at all to any TV networks. Having said that, I think a video can still make a really big impact, and it's an important part of certainly having a hit record. You still need a big video, and obviously with working Adele, I think one of the big selling things on her new single was the fact the video was available from day one and it was out there and everywhere. Probably more people sort of saw the video before they heard the song on the radio. So.
Now, with your license deal, do you get the audio visual rights as well? Are you on the end of the video play income stream? Because that video has been played astonishingly well. And if it's not you, is it Beggars that's actually getting the benefit of that?
It's not us, yeah. But I'm assuming Beggars do, yeah. Yeah, they've paid for the creation of the video, so.
Right. Yeah, I guess I can talk about the MTV, Foxtel music video side of things from an independent perspective. So AIR also does collective bargaining with those two particular organisations. And certainly with MTV, we've had an agreement in place for a couple of years where they pay for use or play of independent music videos. We collect that and then pass that on to our members who have opted into that arrangement. Just in the last month, we've renegotiated a deal with them which is significantly higher than what the last deal was. So their intention is that they're going to be playing a lot more music video. They've got a new programmer in that comes from FBI Radio, so this is what we're being told, and I guess we can only see what that new deal is, and it shows promising signs. Similar with Foxtel, they're wanting to renegotiate as well, and I guess you probably saw in the news recently that there's no universal music videos being broadcast on Foxtel at the moment. It's a shame for Universal. We don't actually mind it because the revenue that we receive from Foxtel is share-based. So we anticipate that our share is going to increase over this last quarter, and it's more money for the independents. So that'll give us more opportunity, I guess, to when we go into those renegotiations earlier in the year, hopefully they'll have seen the importance of the independent content, and having paid us a bit more, they'll see the need to continue to pay us a bit more.
Can I jump in here? It's really interesting talking about the past because a lot of the past is becoming the future. And the idea of looking at your mobile phone or a tablet or a computer, it's just being blurred by looking at a screen, and there's a really big push back into the lounge room. So handing off from the small device to the television via Apple TV or Google Chromecast or whatever it is. And we're seeing a lot of apps popping up now that are kind of catering to that. And in reality, what's happening is things are going back to the MTV days. So, and talking about MTV, they've actually launched an app that's going to be their own channel. And when we were doing the Apple discussions about their new service, the Beats One radio, that when they described it to us and no one knew what it was, I just said, so it's MTV. And they're like, that was what we were thinking. So the new streaming servers are kind of bringing back all of that sort of live programming, so a YouTube channel or whatever, but the nature of the live TV element and the video, it's going to become just part of what we watch, and it's just going to go on a screen wherever you are. So this whole kind of thinking of, well, the old days of MTV is going to be different. It's sort of similar concepts, but just pushing that video or that sound to a different screen wherever you are.
Well, I was thinking about it perhaps in a creative way as well. I mean, part of the success of Gotcha was the video. And here we are a country of filmmakers as well. We've got, what is it, the old punching above your weight thing. We've got serious talent here. And I'm wondering, given the global marketplace, where that in some way gives us a slight advantage in being able to plug into this worldwide network of people who watch visuals from wherever because they're entertaining. It's a slightly optimistic view, but it's something that the independent labels have always tended to be more in touch with the independent filmmakers. It's just a view of the landscape. Now, from your point of view, Sarah, at the moment you're collecting just for music, but are you thinking about Ditto becoming a way that people could access their YouTube royalties, for instance, as this evolves and money actually turns up?
Yeah, we actually have a relationship with Vivo, so we can set up Vivo channels for independent artists and then filter the royalties back to them that way. So we're doing a lot of that at the moment, and Vivo's good for a few reasons, and also in terms of promotion again. So they have initiatives like Vivo Discover and Vivo Lift and all of that kind of thing, where they're wanting to help promote independent artists. And I think what I've seen, and I could possibly be a little bit biased, but I thought working with independent artists, I'd come up against a lot of roadblocks, and it would be major label content or, you know, certain kinds of bands. But I'm really seeing a shift with Apple and iTunes and Spotify and Vivo, where they're really hungry for the independent artists and wanting to be tastemakers and break that band. So I think that's been interesting for me to see that independent artists have a good shot at some promotion as well.
And some of them, of course, once again, are connected to their mates in the film school. They're producing interesting work. When it comes to the uploading, who does if you've got the deal with all the sites, but who does the physical interaction with those sites? Is that you or is that them?
So with all of our audio stuff, we have a huge delivery system, and it all just kind of rolls through that. And with Vivo, we have a dashboard and we upload, but then, you know, we talk to Vivo people directly and head into their office and that kind of thing as well. So I guess I try to have a good relationship with the Australian reps in each of the different stores. And then there's also content teams and huge kind of machines doing all of the uploading as well.
All of the, in fact, is the phrase. I've got a friend in New York. Her name's Vivian Lewitt. She's the head of YouTube's US artist and label relationships. In fact, Paris and I were working on trying to get her to be the keynote speaker this year, and we could very well get her next year. But I know that feeling. I was sitting in the lobby of the YouTube building in the Chelsea market with these wall of screens, and every screen was showing something different, and I was kind of mesmerised in a way. And it's also fascinating stuff, as you know, reality television here is proving that people are quite happy to watch that sort of stuff. So as long as we can have YouTube in somewhat of an amenable position, there is a revenue potential, but with that, there is the question of how we deal with it in terms of distribution. And I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts. I'll just take a broad stroke. The amount of material that we're having to deal with is growing exponentially. Andrew, you might have a number on how many individual transactions AMCOS has to do, and Sean, I won't even ask you because your head will explode, but it's just, it's becoming, what is it? With every opportunity there is an obligation, and at the moment we're standing at the door of this. AMCOS are just investing a substantial amount of money in a computer upgrade so we can deal with it efficiently. We want the money to go where it should go, but how this landscape's going to operate, and Dan, you've got the same problem with your labels. With Merlin can only go so far in putting the building blocks in place, but it's the operation, not nice car, no spark plug sort of thing. It's the operation of it that's going to tell whether people get paid or not, I guess. And the same thing with Ditto. So just a quick, down the line, how are we dealing? How are your members? How are you going with the fact that you're having to process so much more information? Do you have IT centres, or what's the landscape?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and one of the other challenges we have is having to be adaptable as a company, because things will, rise and fall really quickly. Title's an example of something where, it was launched and we had to get all of our stuff there really quickly and all of that kind of thing. So being adaptable is something that we have to be really mindful of. But yeah, we're constantly trying to think of new ways that we can improve our technology so the uploading's easier because we have more content, and we're making sure we're working with good delivery partners and everything, and it's a constant part of the business we have to be mindful of, definitely.
Dan?
Yeah, well, I guess, not all of our members work through Merlin, and some of them do it themselves through delivery platforms and do their own reporting, and that gets harder as each day goes by. But certainly Merlin have invested money and resource into some pretty good systems where they're able to do the reporting on behalf of their members. And yeah, as you touched on, it's just going to be one of those things they're going to have to monitor, and hopefully they put a scalable solution in place that they can continue to grow. It's only going to get bigger, I guess, the whole data side of things.
And I guess people need to understand that there's going to have to be limits on the amount of the payouts, that it's really not worth processing below a certain level of revenue. And even though people go, I was on YouTube at the moment, doesn't mean I get a royalty. It tends to go to the established videos of the established artists simply because of the sheer volume. But we're hoping, as Sean touched on, that we might be able to, and Andrew, that we might be able to get a more precise and electronically driven system at some point in the future that works.
Yeah, we actually saw this happening, and we in 2010 rebuilt our whole infrastructure and tore it apart and started from scratch. It was a lot of money, but it was a essential thing for ASCAP to adapt to what we saw happening, which is now we're processing billions of performances a year. Billions. It's like NASA, and it's just like what we had to do, and the architecture that we built is scalable. So as it continues to expand, there won't be any issue. So now we have to have another like rebuild. We just add more space. We add more CPUs. But it is a perception problem often for our members when they go on to YouTube and they say, wow, I got 100,000 plays of my song. And then they call the ASCAP offices and they say, oh, well, you're not going to get paid for that because they didn't hit the minimum threshold that ASCAP will pay. So the expectations are, wow, ASCAP has a license, I've got 100,000 plays, I'm going to buy a new car. The facts of the matter is that each play is worth such a very, very small amount of money. And it changes all the time, so I'm not going to give out specifics on how much each is worth, but it's like 0.0001 cent per play or something like that. And so it generally will take several 100,000 plays for you to get paid anything.
Yeah. Look, just to follow up on what Ian was saying, asking down the line, APRA is investing a lot of money in their system in the same way as ASCAP probably have. Now, the difference when you look at the publishing side of music versus the recording side is that if you're a label and you upload your stuff to YouTube or whatever, they know where it's come from, they pay you. The problem we have is we also have to then go and identify within the sound recording who all the writers are. So that's a very different situation to just paying a sound recording. So, a track is played, they pay the record label for it. We have to then track down who all the writers are as well, and they're not always from the same company. So you might have a track that's put up there by Universal Records, and Sony ATV writers are on it, Mushroom are on it. So basically we have to have these systems that can track not only the recordings, but who's playing on them, and then where that money all has to go. And the goal, obviously, is to do what's called census reporting, where if my track is played on YouTube once, it generates 0.00001 dollars and automatically it appears in my account. But at the way things are at the moment, and the music industry gets called Luddites by the technology industry, but there's a lot of people working really hard trying to embrace new technologies to make this work. I mean, it's just very difficult. There is a point where you have to say, we can't process anymore because we can't afford to do it. So everybody out there saying, it's all digital, it's all there, it's really easy, it's actually not, because there's so many transactions going on, and a lot of the time there's a lot of claims on different works that are kind of competing. So then that payment gets held up because you've got counterclaims from different parties. So it's very difficult. And everybody's always looking for new ways of doing it. I mean, I'm not sure if anyone's reading all about the blockchain stuff, which is basically BitTorrent. And it's a payment system overlaid on the BitTorrent distribution network. And the idea is that all of the details of who made the recording, who played on it, who were the writers, is put into this chain, which exists decentralized at every computer around the world, just like BitTorrent. When you download a BitTorrent, not that I do, but if you did, then it exists in every computer and it grabs it from different places. So these are the kind of things that people are also looking at. But then that brings you into the situation where you go, all of these payments are based on confidential deals that are different for everybody, and they're always changing. So it might not happen that much in the recording industry where the rights change. So, you know, a universal catalogue might get sold to Sony or whatever. But in the publishing world, it's happening all the time. Catalogues are going everywhere. And so the BitTorrent blockchain is good in theory, but in practice, it's just going to cause a lot of problems. So there's a lot of issues to overcome, but everybody's trying really hard to try to make it work, so that the goal is to pay census and say, okay, my song was played on Spotify in the cafe down the road, and I will get that share of the money in my bank account.
Now, you might notice
difficult.
that this panel had a particular shape, which is to be optimistic, therefore I held this question back till last. The data question, unfortunately, is not fun. So we got 10 minutes. So last question is to you. I know that Paris has deliberately looked for women on panels to just make the point. So just a quick history. How did you end up on a streaming panel? What's your history that got you to this seat today?
Oh, okay, that was an unexpected question.
Exactly.
Because I have worked in digital distribution for a while and have seen the trends and the changes across the Australian landscape, I guess, and representing the independent viewpoint, possibly because there's a lot of independent bands here as well, so it would be relevant to them.
I mean, what's relevant to a lot of people is that you might be in a band. We've had conversations this week about the careers of a band, unfortunately getting shorter, but the careers in the industry, if you are an expert, and particularly an expert in this field where there's not that many experts, it's a good place to be, frankly. Yeah. All right, let's go to questions. We've got a roving mic. And your time starts now.
Do we ever think the streaming revenue will equal what records used to be? Or do you want me to say that so that everyone... Yeah.
Do we ever think the streaming revenue will ever get to a point where it's as good, if not better, than what records used to be in the good old days, for lack of a better word?
Do you want me to take that?
Absolutely, there's no question. We're on a winner here. Absolutely on a roll. No, it will happen. I'll put it this way. There are a lot of people who are working hard behind the scenes in America to stop royalties being paid. We're taking a particularly bad attitude towards them, and we'll just see how we roll. But we do have the law on our side, which is a useful starting point.
Yes. 3 years ago I would have said no, but now I think yes. And the reason is just I think the industry now is much better at getting to the things that are going to make money before they make money and licensing them. Look, it's in their interest to grow the overall market. So really, what has to happen in Australia, to your initial question, for it to get back to where it was, we have to have 4 times as many subscribers. So to answer the question is whether you believe that there will be 4 times as many subscribers. So what has to happen there to make that happen. It just has to become some kind of a mainstream offering, and not just everyone in this room that likes music and probably used to spend a lot more money on physical and downloads, but spends less now on streaming. It needs to grab all those other people who aren't doing that. But I initially started as a anti-streaming person because my band was getting much less money from streaming, and I'm actually a BMI member, which is a competitive organisation in the US. And the numbers coming out were just not good. So that I was against it. But now I feel like if the industry can get it right and get bundled in interesting ways, so half of listening in the US, for example, happens in cars. So if people start bundling into cars, and it just becomes something that you pay for, or you buy a phone and you're not actually paying for the music service. It's just wrapped up in the value of the device. These are the kind of things that can make the money get back to where it was.
Two simple comments. One is that the person who's pushing premium rather than freemium on sites is Lucian Grange, who runs Universal. He's got the power to push that through, and the person pushing for decent publishing royalty rates is Martin Bandier, who runs Sony ATV. These guys understand that this landscape, we need to stand up for ourselves. And, with power, there is a certain amount of responsibility as well. So, and these are decent guys, by the way, as far as I know.
Can I just add that if you look at it on the surface, we used to get about 7% royalty on CDs, and this is for publishing, and now we're getting up to 15 on streaming. So the rates are going up, so if the usage goes up, you should... Sorry?
The pool of money is less than with streaming.
At the moment it is. That's what I'm saying, that if we can get the scale, then actually the royalty rates are higher. So we've been kind of fighting for higher rates, and it's been happening. And it's just a matter of getting the value back from the technology companies who've kind of taken it.
The APRA AMCOS Asian royalty scheme is getting money where there was never any money. I mean, Asia was the world's capital of pirate... Oh, no, I'm sure there's several world's capital of pirated CDs. Let's not forget Russia. But generally, there is a way to get money at the source in territories you would never, in Africa as well, we never have been paid in the past. So there's an upside. More questions? Anyone else? Fine. Right, okay. We'll reconvene in 2 years' time, where all of us will still be here. No, not sure about the audience, but we'll see how we roll. I'd just like to thank all of you. And this overview is the first step down a very important road that's there to be done. And between the people around along this table, we're going to do a fair bit of it in this country. We'll see how the rest of the world goes with us, particularly your friends over there in the US. We're relying on you to some extent to get this happening, Sean. Cheers, mate. Okay, thanks very much.